Recording's in progress, and thanks again to everyone. The beginning. So when the playwright Всеволод Вишневский visited Joyce in Paris in 1936, the two had much to discuss. The Irish writer mentioned that he heard his books were banned in the Soviet Union. Vishnievsky, however, was pleased to report that Ulysses had been translated earlier than in many other countries. Vishnievsky wasn't lying, but a champion of Joyce's art, he exaggerated. The 1925 translation of Ulysses by V. Zhytomyrsky, in fact, consisted only of fragments. Furthermore, the head of the International Information Bureau of the Central Committee, Karl Radek, had infamously led an attack on Joyce, which began in the early 1930s at the first All-Union Congress of Soviet Writers and laid the groundwork for the next several decades of criticism. A pile of dung teeming with worms, photographed with a cinema apparatus through a microscope, Radek proclaimed, "That's Joyce." Still, some recognize Joyce's genius. Boris Poplavsky, a young émigré writer, delivered a lecture in 1930 in which he asserted his profound admiration. Everything taken together creates an absolutely stunning document, something so real, so alive, so diverse, and so truthful that it seems to us that if it were necessary to send to Mars or God knows where a single sample of earthly life, we're facing the destruction of European civilization to preserve a single book for posterity, perhaps it would be best to leave Joyce's Ulysses. Statements such as those of Radek and Poplavsky stand at maximalist extremes, reflecting this wide range of emotions and strong opinions that Joyce's text elicited and continue to elicit from readers of different artistic and ideological camps. But before becoming anathema to the Soviet regime, Joyce was widely discussed, if not frequently read. His art then turned into a forbidden fruit to be enjoyed mostly in private until the publication of the Viktor Hinkis, Sergei Haruji, Ulysses translation in the late 1980s, which you see pictured here. Nevertheless, Joyce became an attractive symbol for a branch of Western literature in Soviet and émigré communities. What they appreciated in his text varied: a radical approach to language, new devices, the ability to transform their experience as a budding artist into a national epic, a dangerous or progressive influence. And amid these various points of emphasis, Russians crafted a personal version of Joyce, my Joyce, along the lines of a my Pushkin, for themselves, while responding to similar concerns, history and paternity foremost among them. Indeed, while Russian literature's conversation with Joyce touches on many subjects, Joyce's project to alter his past and his future through writing, as exemplified by his protagonist Stephen Dedalus's aesthetic theories in Ulysses, serves as a major through line in this story in my book. The five writers I focus on, Yuri Alyosha, Vladimir Nabokov, Andrei Bitov, Sasha Sokolov, and Mikhail Shishkin, are fascinated by, even obsessed with, the question of literary heritage, paternity. The Russian historical experience altered how writers might relate to their predecessors by violently cutting them out from the tradition, by limiting access to a lineage and a place in the development of world literature. Partly for this reason, Stephen's Shakespeare theory serves as a productive lens through which to examine these writers' relations to Joyce. And by this, I mean, in episode 9 of Ulysses, Stephen suggests that a writer can rewrite the past by creating lasting art and by selecting a literary forefather to supplant the biological. According to him, for instance, Shakespeare became a father to himself by writing Hamlet and therefore engendering the world's conception of the bard, becoming a father to himself, to the idea of his legacy. All five Russian writers responded to this idea in Ulysses based on their circumstances. It varied. Joyce's creation served as one impetus for their experiments, but the theory also functions as a mirror by which their anxieties and goals can be observed. Simultaneously, this subject raises the issue of how throughout the 20th century, cultural values changed in the Soviet Union, Russian immigration, and the post-1991 Russian environment. What was possible? What was desirable? Where did Russian literature belong? The responses to Joyce's texts, particularly Ulysses and Finnegans Wake, speak to how they tackled such immense questions relative to their own time and place. And to give a sense of how this process worked, I'd like to comment on a couple of these case studies. For the sake of time, I'll only focus on examples drawn from two writers' novels, Yuri Alyosha and Sasha Sokolov, per Anna's request. But of course, I'd be happy to discuss the others if I'm missing anyone else's favorites, or if you're just curious about any of the others and their interpretations of Joyce during the Q&A. Speaking at the 1936 General Meeting of the Moscow Union of Soviet Writers, Alyosha offered Joyce as the face of a negative alien model that must be eradicated. According to Alyosha, Joyce exemplified the reason for the urgent need to struggle against formalism and naturalism. The artist should say to man, yes, 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 but Joyce says, no, no, no. Everything is bad on earth, says Joyce, and thus all his brilliance is of no use to me. This writer said, cheese is the corpse of milk. Look, comrades, how terrible. The writer of the West saw the death of milk. He said that milk can be dead. Is it well said? It is well said. It is said correctly, but we don't want such correctness. We want neither naturalism nor formalist tricks, but artistic dialectical truth. On the surface, there's nothing particularly special about Alyosha's comments, which align with the trend in Soviet criticism from the early 1930s on to denounce Joyce's perceived pessimism and non-progressive vision of history. By reproaching Joyce early and publicly, he could align himself with the so-called correct critical point of view and potentially avoid greater troubles, such as arrest or execution even in the future. Examined more closely, Alyosha's speech reveals itself to be highly contrived and not without contradictions. In the process of covering his own modernist tracks by damning Joyce's formalistic technique and purportedly pessimistic worldview, he alludes to Ulysses' famous lyrical conclusion. Molly Bloom's stream of consciousness soliloquy at the end of Ulysses, when she recalls her future husband's proposal. Then he asked me would I to say yes, my mountain flower. And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me so he could feel my breasts all perfume. Yes, and his heart going like mad. And yes, I said, yes, I will, yes. Alyosha's statements thus begin with an obvious lie. Joyce's finale ends with one of the most well-known affirmations in European literature. It stands as an instructive contrast to Alyosha's own cynical ending to his novel Envy, which finds its protagonists resigned to their undesirable fates. Such an unconvincing and odd juxtaposition raises a host of questions. Just how sincere was Alyosha in his speech? Why does he lie about Joyce's pessimism? Was he truly abasing himself, or did he expect his audience to see through the subterfuge? Despite his diatribe, Alyosha implicitly champions Joyce's artistry by recognizing the milk corpse metaphor as strong. His comments thus represent a non-committal doublespeak. Despite the ambiguities, they raise the issues of Alyosha's complicated relationship with Joyce and how he responded to Ulysses through his own fiction, through the novel Envy. Joyce's impact on Envy goes beyond sporadic allusions to Ulysses. Alyosha, in fact, establishes a sustained response as he investigates ideas central to his situation within a climate growing hostile toward experimentation and individualism. In rereading Envy through the lens of Ulysses, we better understand the former's thematic complexities. The parallels and reversals that Alyosha features throughout his text can best be understood as a response from one writer who attempts to conceptualize the issues facing his generation in an unstable period to the work of another writer who faced analogous concerns in different conditions. With his references to Ulysses, Alyosha suggests the difficulty, even the impossibility, for a Soviet writer like him to pursue Stephen's Shakespearean-inspired individualist path. So, looking at some particulars, like Ulysses, Envy concerns the clash and potential union between a young poet, Nikolai Kovalyerov, and a more successful older man, Andrei Babachev, a kind of businessman in the NEP era, the new economic policy era of the Soviet Union in the late 20s. One of the most intriguing amalgamations of characters occurs on Envy's opening pages. Alyosha recreates the morning scene from Joyce's novel, how Ulysses begins, by alluding to Stephen's roommate, Buck Mulligan, via Babachev, the successful man. Apologies for the many words here, but you can kind of go back and forth and see what I'm describing here. So these are the two passages side by side from the beginning of each novel. Possessing huge physicality and tremendous life, Babachev shares many features with Buck. The latter also enjoys morning routines and pays close attention to bodily needs and sensations. The character's vigor overflows into Buck's chanting and Andrei's noisy ablutions as he bathes. Their antipodes, the writers Stephen and Cavaliero, run counter with their sleepiness and sardonic attitudes. Neither Babachev nor Buck, however, feels in the slightest upset by his roommate's gloomy disposition. Their complete self-absorption beats everything. In addition, the buoyancy inherent to their nature comes through in various restless actions. Buck's ridiculous rapid crossings mid-gurgling, Babachev's reflex to sing in tune with his bowel movements and to thrust out his elbows as he knocks against the walls of the toilet while he shifts on his feet. Accrued energy, reflected in the various action verbs, keeps their bodies in motion, pulling other characters into their spheres of influence. But Babachev's famous bathroom scene also clearly owes much to another character from Ulysses, Leopold Bloom, the other protagonist. And this scatological moment could be neatly traced back not to Russian literature, but rather to Joyce's hero. Here's a staging with Leopold Bloom. Quietly, Bloom read, restraining himself, the first column, and yielding but resisting began the second. Midway, his last resistance yielding, he allowed his bowels to ease themselves quietly as he read, reading still patiently, that slight constipation of yesterday quite gone. Bloom and Babachev immersed themselves in the physiological rhythm of the release of their bowels, finding a supplementary pleasure in the control they exert. Again, it's all about the body. Such concern for the physical is emblematic of envy, where Cavaliero places so much emphasis on Babachev's fleshy and massive frame, admiring its strength and feeling repelled by it. Ulysses' unflinching portrayal of all aspects of human physicality, from bathroom habits to sexual encounters, offered Ilyesha and others a model for such candidness. Ooh, okay. Opposite the three-part Babachev-Bloom-Buck figure looms, or rather lies, Cavaliero. This would-be writer corresponds to Joyce's stand-in Stephen, the young hero in Ulysses. The two are chiefly united by a struggle against their respective father figures, biological and otherwise. And again, in this parallel, Ilyesha makes his rebuttal against Joyce's position as a Western writer, not one that he dislikes necessarily, but one whose ideas cannot help him in the Soviet Union. In both Ulysses and Envy, an older man sympathizes with an artist after an alcohol-induced confrontation leaves him in the gutter. So the older men actually find the younger men drunkenly passed out after a fight. Bloom recognizes in Stephen, rebel against the old order, old fathers, his own deceased son, Rudy, whose ghost, aged to 11 in a haunting scene, rises before him as he gazes at Stephen's body on the street. Babachev too feels sympathy for Cavaliero, a rebel against the new order, the new Soviet order, primarily out of paternal feelings displaced from another young man he's adopted. So it was a repeat occurrence, in a way. From this shared plot point arises one of the primary sources of anxiety for Cavaliero and Stephen, their sense of dispossession. They both turn out from their living quarters, as well as from a bar and brothel, respectively, and these events lead them to experience a sense of displacement that feels equally physical and mental. They believe that they don't belong either with the individuals around them or with society at large. Again, a topic that undoubtedly extends beyond the Russian Joycean tradition, but that nevertheless unites these various authors and texts. In Ulysses' opening episode, Stephen begrudgingly turns over his key to Buck when they go swimming and calls him, among other things, usurper. In other words, Stephen treats his peers as symbols of a divided Irish culture, for he disagrees with Buck's involvement with the Englishman Haynes and his anthropological interest in the Celtic revival, this Englishman who's visiting them. Cavaliero expresses a similar sentiment to Babachev's brother, Ivan, after he's told to vacate Andrei, Babachev's apartment. Quote, an important person had thrown him out of his own home, end quote. And he's referring to Babachev's apartment, not actually his own space. They feel a sense of entitlement over their living space, never mind the questions of priority and ownership involved. In each case, the implications of being usurped go beyond the domestic dispute. More importantly, issues of national and cultural dispossession besiege them. Much like its beginning, the end of Envy supplies a fascinating reformulation of Ulysses. Bloom's homecoming to his wife Molly might be compared to Kavalierov's and Ivan Babachev's dual occupation of the widow Anichka's room. And the synchronization begins when Kavalierov returns to Anichka's apartment, this woman that he's renting space in her apartment from. Before falling ill, he turns on the water tap, and then after sleeping with her, dreams of a rushing flow. Likewise, having made his way home with Stephen in Ulysses' penultimate episode, Bloom turns on a faucet and the narrative takes up his fascination with water. What in water did Bloom, water lover, drawer of water, water carrier, returning to the rage, admire? Bloom and Kavalierov wash, then go to their respective wife-mother figures, creating another instance of Alyosha's subverted parallels. Each author employs the image of the water tap as a means of purification, but soon after we discover that the outcomes are substantially different. Kavalierov's cleansing experience devolves into a nightmare. Much as Stephen fears his mother's corpse as an embodiment of the past hold over him, ghoul, chewer of corpses, no mother, let me be and let me live. Kavalierov considers Anichka a reminder of the history he wishes to shed. During the scene in which Kavalierov beats the widow, the narrator likens her to a woman from Pompeii, a particularly vivid simile. Like the ruins of Pompeii, Anichka and the stultifying existence that Kavalierov associates with her will not be stamped out. The sons furthermore envision Anichka and May Daedalus, Stephen's mother, as corpses, incarnations of a death that is both literal and figurative. And this critical difference between the two endings, lies in Kavalierov's divergence from Stephen's path. Alyosha closes Envy with his hero's resignation to remain with Ivan, a father figure that he resents very much, and with Anichka. And this is all accompanied by Ivan's ironic hurrah. The latter's Ivan's grotesque proclamation that it's now Kavalierov's turn to sleep with Anichka frightens him, as these words remind him of his transformation into a paternal figure. He, in a sense, morphs into the Bloomian type, refuting his association with the youthful, artistic Stephen developed so far in the novel, and resigning himself to a defeated state of affairs. Ivan Babachev, Kavalierov's second paternal surrogate, is forced by circumstance as well as by choice into a decadent Blazes Boylan role in this closing scene. And Blazes Boylan is the man that Molly Bloom sleeps with during the day in the novel. Ivan cuckolds Kavalierov in a way by claiming Anichka before his protege's return, thus ruining the young man's plans to, quote, put the widow in her place, end quote, his final botched expression of power. In the widow's bed, Kavalierov's masculinity is challenged, and his father's history, or the lack thereof, haunts him. He realizes that he'll go no further than his predecessor, but remains doomed to repeat an insignificant life. By bookending Envy with parallel variants of Ulysses' beginning and conclusion, Alyosha emphasizes the main points of his response to Joyce. Kavalierov may begin in a situation comparable to Stephen's as a dispossessed writer seeking transformation and resolution, but his project collapses. Stephen, as yet untested, boldly proclaims, in the intense instant of imagination, that which I was is that which I am, and that which in possibility I may come to be. Alyosha intimates that in Joyce's West, there may be cause for sons to rebel against fathers, but there's also the option to go their own way should they have the courage. No such alternative, Stephen's possibility, exists for men like Kavalierov. Turning now to Sasha Sokolov's second case study, in a 2011 interview, the author recounts that he read Joyce along figures such as Stein, Whitman, and Apollinaire, and he adds that the formal innovations he sought weren't to be found in writers such as Salinger or Faulkner. And furthermore, aiming to establish his status as a true cosmopolitan, Sokolov elevates Western writers over Russians. Joyce and company are more important to me than Platonov, a modernist Russian writer. These innovations that he refers to are key, for unlike many previous writers, Sokolov's Joycean influence took root in his style, perhaps above all. All three of Sokolov's books are notoriously difficult to summarize, each in its own way. And if you've read any, you know. A School for Fools, which you see here, established this pattern by breaking with many norms of fiction, perhaps reflecting the hero's condition as a maybe young man who's called student so-and-so at times, and he has mental issues of some sort, The writer's debut novel lacks a clear chronological plot, and numerous characters are also imbued with different personas and names and identities. The action mostly takes place either at the student's dacha community or at his school. His parents act as foils, particularly his father, who makes student so-and-so copy articles from Soviet newspapers as a cruel re-education. The hero also spends his time pining for Vieta Akatova, a teacher and the daughter of a scientist who lives nearby. But despite what I just said, all is not so simple. Instead of experiencing the passage of time as a linear progression, the protagonist imagines it as a simultaneity in which he can drop his consciousness into any moment of his life. And the practical effect of this condition is that contradictory situations can coincide within the novel. Chapter 2 likewise breaks readers' expectations as the narrative shifts from student so-and-so and is dispersed among 12 short vignettes. So within this atypical novel that Sokolov engages in his Joycean revolution of the word. One stratagem Sokolov and Joyce share is what's usually termed stream of consciousness, which you see here. In this first instance of this prototypically modernist technique from A School for Fools, student so-and-so's narrative morphs into an even looser form of its already frenzied state. Here, his words serve as an incantation that brings the character Vieta into existence. And I'll comment on that in a second. In Sokolov's hands, stream of consciousness functions as a means to explore the connections the mind creates and the rhythms of thoughts themselves, at least within the imagination of his narrator, and also how this is all reproduced through written literary language. On another level, Sokolov adapts this technique from Joyce as a means of escape from fossilized forms. Amid the continued calls for art that concerns itself with social questions and places an emphasis on content, Sokolov turned to modernist prototypes. Incidentally, in an interview with Olga Matic, Sokolov proposes, not without a hint of self-defense, that he learned a great deal from the modernist, as he calls him, Lev Tolstoy, who used stream of consciousness as a device long before Joyce, according to Sokolov. True as this may be or not, depending on how you feel, Sokolov's stream of consciousness simply looks like Joyce's much more than Tolstoy's or even Faulkner's. It is, as it were, a parody of the modernist stream of consciousness in its self-aware recognition of the interdependence of writing and thought, a representation of this in writing. In School for Fools, in Sokolov's literary universe, language itself, rather than plot or character, dictates the novel's progression. Here, in this passage, the railway branch, Vietka, Severnaya Vietka, transforms into a branch of an acacia tree, Vietka Akatsi, and finally into the multifaceted character Vieta, teacher, railway prostitute, and beloved. While Joyce's heroine Molly doesn't perform the same linguistic sorcery, her soliloquy features similar jumps in thought. So you have School for Fools and then a couple others on the right-hand side. Then you have to look out of the window, all the nicer. Then coming back, suppose I never came back. What would they say? Eloped with him. That gets you on the stage. The last concert I sang at. Where? It's over a year ago. When was it? St. Teresa's Hall. But in Finnegans Wake, this principle can be found on nearly every page, of course. Dogging you round cove and haven and teaching me the perts of speech. If you spun your warns to him on the swishbark waves, I was spelling my urines to her over cottage cake. Will not disturb their sleeping duties. Let besoms be bosoms. It's phoenix dear, and the flame is here. Puns, homonyms, suggestive roots, and all sorts of sound play build up the impression of a text that has become both overwhelmed by the power of language itself and self-consciously captivated by its own possibilities, much as in A School for Fools. The major difference, of course, is that Sokolov is not as interested in multilingual play as Joyce is. If Sokolov disrupts plot and language in such myriad ways, his approach to character is no less iconoclastic. One of the most distinctive aspects of Sokolov's art is his use of forking characters, that is, characters who blend between different identities. Such play with character occupies a greater role in his second novel, Between Dog and Wolf, as well as Joyce's Finnegans Wake, but its roots can be observed in both of the writer's earlier novels as well. And the contrast between the two halves of the student's mind is very much divided between two personalities that talk to each other. the artistic free-spirited individual and the more demanding identity that tries valiantly to tame this more spirited side. In this conflict, we see echoes of the relationship between the brothers Shem the penman and Sean the postman in Finnegans Wake. Descriptions of this dialectic by Colin McCabe could very well apply to the student. Sean accuses Shem of refusing to be a proper member of society. Shem is accused of being a forger, constantly imitating others in his writing. His pride goes together with an absolute refusal to join in the patriotic struggle, which would offer him the chance of achieving true manhood. Instead, he prefers to occupy himself with the affairs of women. End quote. The more obedient half of the student's mind questions the other's flights of imagination and tries to temper any creative impulses with references to reality and authority. The patriotic struggle, in this case, concerns the standards of Soviet society, something the student fails to uphold in every regard. Less successful than Shem in romance, the student still devotes a great deal of his narrative to women, particularly Vieta, and expresses an urgent wish to understand sex. Both authors, though, complicate matters by constantly merging and splitting the two figures. In The Wake, Joyce's brothers fight and fight, and yet they become one. With this laudable purpose and loud ability, let us be sin-gulfed, emerge into Shemshan. The student, too, experiences moments of complete internal discord. Oh, I was mistaken, sir, that one. The other one dreams of becoming an engineer, as well as of agreement. But why did you pluck it? Of course I shouldn't have. I didn't want to, believe me, as they talk to each other. In Ulysses, Skill and Charybdis chapter, Stephen proposes that a person's character shifts and constantly reflects back on itself as it takes on new self-created iterations. Every life is many days, day after day. We walk through ourselves, meeting robbers, ghosts, giants, old men, young men, wives, widows, brothers in love, but always meeting ourselves. This insight, of course, plays a role in his Shakespeare theory, which is tied closely to his conception of art as a vessel for the creation of one's identity. Student so-and-so explicates a similar idea near the end of A School for Fools. The song of years, the melody of life, all the rest is not you. All the others are alien. Who are you yourself? You'll only find out later, stringing the beads of memory, consisting of them. You yourself will be memory. Reduced to the state of being, one need only piece together recollections, artistically reconceived, to fashion a personality, whether it draws on the efforts of one's predecessors or not. Elsewhere, though, Stephen, the student, considered the world external to the memory and mind and come to different conclusions. Walking along the beach, Stephen closes his eyes to pay attention to the noises around him. He notes various sounds, worries about falling as he closes his eyes, and ultimately turns his gaze to his surroundings. Open your eyes now. Has all vanished since? If I open him forever in the black Arianphine, basta. I will see if I can see now. See now. There all the time without you, and ever shall be, world without end. Stephen learns two things here. First, he comes to appreciate the world of the audible more deeply. And second, more importantly, once he opens his eyes and recognizes the beach around him, the fact that the world exists independently of his consciousness strikes him with full force. Sokolov includes a similar episode in School's first chapter. Having taken several steps along the beach, I looked back. Nothing resembling my tracks remained on the sand, and nevertheless, I still did not want to believe. You never know, as it happens. First, it could turn out that it's all a dream. Second, it's possible that the sand here is extraordinarily firm, and I, weighing a total of only so many kilograms, did not leave tracks in it because of my lightness. And third, it's quite probable that I didn't disembark from the boat onto the shore yet, but to this point still sit in it, and naturally, I could not leave tracks where I had not yet been. But Stephen's realization that external reality, or while his realization that external reality doesn't depend on his perception, frustrates his ego, the student examines the sand for proof of his existence and finds none. Yet his response is not despair, but bemusement. Setting aside the fact that the scene, along with everything else, is entirely imagined by the student, Sokolov emphasizes the transient nature of reality, art, and character in an allusion to Joyce's novel. If Stephen's certainty in structures and the artist's vision is, at least temporarily here, disturbed by the incident on the beach, then the student's disillusion comes into sharper focus. He leaves no marks on the sand, only on the page, dissolving, as it were, into the truly protean stylistic texture of language and non-plot. The student's third identity, to complicate things further, is called those who came, tie, kto prišli, and it also subverts Joyce. Limited to 5 references in school, this nickname brings to mind Joyce's "Here Comes Everybody" from Finnegans Wake. The most famous of his hero, Humphrey, Chimpton, Earwicker's monikers, "Here Comes Everybody" represents his universal character. Quote, "An imposing everybody he always indeed looked, constantly the same as and equal to himself and magnificently well worthy of any and all such universalization," end quote. So "Here Comes Everybody" is therefore the complete embodiment of Joyce's extreme approach to character development. HCE is everyone within the book and without the book. It takes in elements of many different personas, people, historical figures, and he's the human. The student elatedly speaks of this name, his name, "those who came." And wherever we came, they said about us, "Look, there they are, those who came, greedy for knowledge, daring lovers of truth." In both, end quote. In both Joyce and Sokolov, these names, TWC and HCE, represent a generalized presence rather than a particular character with individual traits. However, Sokolov inverts the Joycean original with his character's name, suggesting a terminal point of development in one sense, but also challenging any definitive solution to the problem of primacy. Thus, "Those who came" is or are the result of "Here Comes Everybody," a take on character that universalizes and breaks apart identity. Devoid of any firm foundation in time, TWC simply live in the present, arrived, existing. This conception of a character without past or future emphasizes Sokolov's guiding interest in escaping from any kind of conflict with literary history. As the all in all and totally present, TWC need not find a precedent like Stephen or Kavalierov, following the Shakespeare theory more directly. To take one more related example, how the two writers play with time speaks to yet more similarities. In school, Sokolov grammaticalizes the student's wandering mind by having him speak or write in all 3 tenses, as you see here. This process, moreover, allows him to die, live, and repeatedly return to life, as he can experience all moments at once. Joyce uses the same formulation in Finnegans Wake. "Teams of times and happy returns, the same anew, Ordovio or Viracordo. Anna was, Livia is, pluribels to be." Here, as with plot and character, the two writers take an innovative approach to time. Their characters, student so-and-so and Anna Livia Pluribel, the female archetype, live multiple lives as they're born and reborn in the narrative fabric in various forms. Through this construction, time loses meaning and humanity gains universality and immortality in their art. "History," Sokolov once said in an interview, "simply doesn't interest me. I don't believe that you can extract the future from it." This foregrounding of the present is central to Joyce's thought as well. Discussing his final novel, the Irishman once said, "There is no past, no future. Everything flows in an eternal present." We see the same in his fiction. In Ulysses, a novel dealing with a single day's events, June 16th, Molly's soliloquy reflects her immediate thoughts, her menstrual cycle, her singing career, and yet they constantly reevaluate the past, adjusting her inability to overcome her love for the flawed Bloom. In Finnegans Wake, Vico's theory of circular history structures the narrative as events. HCE's alleged crime of exposing himself, foremost among them, are retold in different guises. History seems to be taking place alongside the present. And finally, in A School for Fools, the student's narrative is obsessed with the present moment, and yet the circularity of the novel, when people come alive and die and are reborn, is difficult to miss. So these are 2 case studies in what might be called the linear history of Joyce's impact on Russian letters. They describe how Joyce progressively entered and changed Russian literature in these moments. However, the Joyce in Russia story might also be properly calibrated with an explicit awareness of the fertility of borrowings and of Joycean intertextuality. Reading intertextually necessarily involves recognizing literary history, one prerequisite for which is a working assumption that history can be recounted and interpreted in a coherent manner. And this position isn't to be surrendered. Much can be learned regarding the texts and contexts of these Russian writers. However, The first thing to consider is the possibility that there's something intrinsically oppositional in the position of a writer vis-a-vis history. Each Russian author's reading of Joyce, their Joyce, and there's no monolithic Joyce, speaks not only to their understanding of his work, but also to their efforts to situate themselves within shifting historical factors and legacies, as well as an evolving comprehension of intertextual relations, how we understand intertextuality, its relations between authors and works. The writer's struggle with history, according to this line of reasoning, is an attempted liberation from a worldview that stifles one's current reality with concerns about the past. When Stephen famously calls history a nightmare from which he is trying to awake, he has in mind the hold of the past embodied by his parents, England, and Catholicism. And he also has in mind the weight of literature that looms over him. Ulysses then represents a working through of these ideas as Stephen attempts to shake free from the stranglehold of a multitude of fathers, both literal and figurative, by means of a Shakespeare theory. And numerous Russian writers with their own historical baggage, different, of course, eagerly turn to this theme in his work. But the writer's and historian's craft is also essentially dependent on their worldviews. It's a kind of narrative. We might then imagine what a polyphonic approach to history that's not yet concluded can yield, especially if applied to more recent materials in the Russian Joyce story. How has Joyce come to be read in the last 30 years? What does he represent to the latest generation of writers, critics, and readers? How do they conceive of his influence, that naughty word, now that he's been successfully reincorporated into the canon? And for my book's conclusion in 2019, early 2020, I interviewed a number of authors to get a sense of this alternate Joyce in Russia story, one that's more open-ended, maybe chaotic in a sense, as yet unfixed, and put together this mini oral history. And I'll show you specific quotes in a second. This is part of my conclusion. Oops, okay. So first, how some writers encountered Joyce. A couple, Marina Stepnova and Anna Glazova, spoke to me of the physical response Joyce elicited in them, the kind of magical power his words held over them, their bodies even. While Ivan Sokolov, of a younger generation, suggested that even by his time, Joyce was commonplace, something found on his parents' bookshelf. Another key theme in our conversations were the connections between Russian literature and Joyce. Some view him as a foreign continuation of sorts of the Russian tradition. Alexei Salnikov, for instance, told me, in some way, Joyce affirmed the right of the Russian classics. I have in mind here, of course, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, to write verbosely, long-windedly, with a strong focus on details, leaving the plot somewhere to the side of the whole enormous narrative. Dmitry Bykov, one of Russia's most well-known writers and critics, found something even more experimental in Joyce's art, even if its origins come from Tolstoy. For me, Joyce is the founder of total realism, which touches on all aspects of being, from the religious to the physiological. He's Tolstoy's main successor, and he pulled off Tolstoy's dream of producing a detailed description of a fictional person's day. We know too how these writers, among a number of others that I interviewed, view the connection between Joyce's work and the Soviet experience in quite different ways. For example, Sergei Solovyov uses a Golden Fleece Odyssey comparison to suggest that Soviet readers could relate to Ulysses given the mythological, teleological underpinnings of the Soviet project. And Zinovy Zinnik, on the other hand, focuses on the in-betweenness of Ulysses and Soviet life, the question of finding one's own true identity in this kind of mixed up, complicated world of the Soviet Union and beyond. It's clear, of course, that the story of Joyce in Russia remains in motion, despite his official canonization within the Russian sphere. What we can pull from these statements and others is how Joyce became and continues to be emblematic of a desire for freedom. This freedom has taken various forms, but undergirding many of them is the hope to combat a historical narrative that aims to restrict the artist's identity. Men out of time, early Soviet writers such as Alyosha, saw in Joyce's work a solution to their precarious state as individualist artists in the newly formed Soviet Union. Their turn to the Western Joyce was a complicated one, not successful, to say the least, not always. Meanwhile, émigrés such as Poplavsky and Nabokov sought to recover the past that the 1917 revolution had taken from them by translating Joyce's texts and his aesthetic theories into their own context, sometimes literally or quasi-literally. I'd be happy to talk more about that or the translation history bit too. Post-Stalinist writers such as Beethoven opted to disengage from the war with the past, seeing the futility of doing so, while even later writers, Sokolov among them, finally broke through and accessed Joyce as a stylistic influence. For the post-Soviet era, turning to Joyce means reconnecting Russian literature with the tradition it had been separated from officially for so long, from modernism. This context fuels the novels of the Russian Joyceans, and in their engagement with the Irish writers' theories, they found much to shape their own visions and their responses to the world around them. But this transformation cuts both ways. Strong writers, as Harold Bloom writes in his controversial Western canon, have the wit to transform their forerunners into composite and therefore partly imaginary beings. Indeed, Joyce became a remarkably plastic symbol for those Russian writers who viewed him as a crucial element in their escape from oppressive histories. Fluctuating political, cultural, and personal realities would dictate how exactly they could read Joyce, literally and figuratively, yet they found in his writings the means to beget their own lineage through the literary word. And thus, his work in progress continues on Russian soil. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. That was wonderful. I'll just get everyone up on screen again.
Stop share too.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was, I get the feeling it's sort of whistle stop. There must be so much more you could talk about, but I haven't got the time. But that was wonderful. Thank you. Such a sort of such subtle and artful comparisons between little texts, and then such lovely summary at the end, which actually speaks to my very particular question that I have for you. And before I ask that, I'll just remind everybody, please do pop your questions in the chat or put up your hand. I think people are clapping at the moment rather than putting up their hand, but that's nice all the same. And so yeah, please do give us your questions. My question is going back to Ulysses and envy, just very small thing, thinking of that charming Radek quote about Joyce and how ghastly he was. In Envy, which I confess I've never read, there's clearly a certain carnality in the life of Kavalierov in his bowel movements and such things. And I'm just curious, based on what I know of early Soviet censoriousness in particular, how and why those things were tolerable, whereas other things I can understand as being less tolerable, such as what you call Joyce's pessimism about human individuality in some ways, or the question of the national in the Dubliners and Ulysses, for instance. And so is it because Kavalierov fails in the story, as I understand it? So his iniquity, his carnality is part of his undoing? Is that right? Is that why it's a tolerated thing?
I think the important, thank you for the question. And again, another invitation for any other questions people might have. I think the main difference here is the timing. So I should have mentioned this perhaps, but Envy was published in 1927. Mm-hmm. So there is a gap there between the Radek quote and the publication of Envy. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Alyosha was initially welcomed, or Envy was welcomed in the Soviet press and in general readership, I think, as something worth reading and a welcome contribution to this art. And yet, with time, Soviet critics started to wonder where its sympathies actually were laid. Whether we're supposed to sympathize with Kavalierov, this young man who's struggling in the new system, or not. Are we meant to sympathize with Babachev, the successful NEP era businessman who is fleshy nonetheless, and this physicality is there. And partly for that reason, partly in the 1930s, another famous quote by Alyosha at one of these Union of Soviet Writer meetings, he proclaimed that he was giving up these old themes and wanted to focus on the new era, the new generation, and contribute to building something new that's useful and Soviet, not concerned with the things that Envy was concerned with. And he kind of abandoned this dream of following Joyce's path or following the Western model in any sense. So I think there were other concerns in the 20s where this physicality just wasn't a big issue, or as much as it might have been later. But certainly, by the time of Radek, this does become an issue, right? That, as he says, Joyce, or the sorts of things that we see in Envy, the bowel movements and and all the, I don't know, grimier at times, or just more physical and more human elements of Ulysses is not the clear Soviet vision that we're supposed to be developing now in the 30s.
Sure. Thank you. Anyone else with a question, please? We have one in the chat. Oh, Anna, do you want to go? And then I'll ask, well, Anna Maslanova, do you want to go? And then I'll ask Anna Lively's question afterwards.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Jose. It was extremely kind of you to focus on these two texts.
It made it easy for me.
And I was extremely happy that you confirmed my idea that this scene in a closet at the beginning is connected with Joyce, because it's like such a I don't know, such a carnal element in the novel. I was thinking about Shakespeare in both texts, and well, like the most obvious connection with Shakespeare with this machine, or this dystopian image of Ophelia. And I was curious if somehow Alesha's reading of Shakespeare can be connected with Joyce's reading of Shakespeare. So I would be curious about this, if you have any ideas. And the second question about Sasha Sokolov, thank you very much for your comparing of two kinds of stream of consciousness. It was really interesting. I was thinking how interesting it is that Sasha Sokolov adopted this Joyce's tool of stream of consciousness for describing the way how a person with some mental disability thinks. And I thought, well, it would be interesting to hear what you think about it. If the history of a person with mental problems in Russian culture, it's not new. It wasn't Sasha Sokolov who created this idea, and obviously it is Dostoevsky's Idiot which comes to mind first. And in Dostoevsky we have this polyphony, and I thought if Sasha Sokolov's using Joyce's stream of consciousness can be described as Dostoevsky's polyphony of the 20th century, so like the development of Dostoevsky's polyphony, sorry, I'll say it in Russian because I'm a bit confused with the stress in this word. So if it can be somehow described as a development of this technique, of this 19th century technique.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Yeah, no, like I was saying, it made my job easier to have some idea of which authors the audience might be interested in hearing about. So thank you for asking for them, recommending them. For the Shakespeare connection, I'm not sure. I mean, I think for me, the main connection is through the Shakespeare theory, this concept that you can become a father to yourself, and how Alyosha's obviously responding to similar concerns. And I think by creating these parallels and inversions to Ulysses, very clear connections between the works, he's taking up a similar topic and working through these issues in the Soviet context. Beyond that, yeah, I mean, Ophelia is, for those of you who haven't read Envy, Ophelia is the name of a machine that Ivan Babachev, the brother, seems to create, and it's destructive, but also fertile in a way, in a child of Ivan's imagination, but also kind of an adopted child as well. And it appears in dream sequences. There's that, and then Alyosha also wrote an adaptation of Hamlet and of Shakespeare, and had that produced as well. So I think I didn't encounter any explicit references in Alyosha's memoirs, or memoirs about him rather, where they're discussing Joyce and Shakespeare directly in these terms that you're asking about. For me, I think it comes through more in the text in terms of the Shakespeare theory. I hope that answers your question. The second one, for Sokolov and his narrator having some sort of mental disability or issue in this tradition. Another factor here is Faulkner, and there's been some work on this on The Sound and the Fury, right, with Benji. Yeah, as another character who screams and has this cry, and Sokolov's student so-and-so does the same thing. That at certain point in the novel, he just cries out in a non-human language. And it seems, I don't know, I again haven't read anything where Sokolov nothing comes to mind anyway, where he references Dostoevsky necessarily. I think, other writers like Tolstoy and Faulkner and Joyce are maybe closer to him and his art. And yet, I think the polyphony is absolutely crucial in maybe Between Dog and Wolf, the second novel, Mieszu Sobako I Volkom, where the characters are even more diffuse and all these voices are speaking, and there's all these quotations and collections from different sources and characters speaking in these different ways. But also in A School for Fools, the polyphony, I think, is foregrounded too. And I didn't even mention this in the presentation, but in The School for Fools, the character speaks to the author as well, as you know. So the author appears in certain moments and at the end, and has a direct conversation with the hero, student so-and-so, which, you don't get more polyphonic than that, I guess, when you have direct conversation between these different layers of the narration and the plot.
Okay, well, thank you for your reply, but I'm quite sure she must have considered the idiot at least, because it's just such a big text and such a big and just the general topic of mental illness in Russian culture. It's a big thing, but and I feel like Joyce gave him a language for exploration to explore this traditional topic from a bit different perspective.
For Joyce.
But it's extremely interesting. Thank you so much.
Oh, but so
Sorry?
Were you asking about Joyce reading Dostoevsky indeed?
No, okay. About Sasha Sokolov, of course.
No, I mean, I'm sure he read it. So yeah. I just had nothing comes to mind where he's commented on it. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Anna. Anna Lively has a question in the chat. Thanks for a very interesting talk. I was wondering how far Russian writers engaged with the Irish context of Joyce's work and Irish history, or was this largely incidental to their interpretations of Joyce? Essentially, he could have been from anywhere in Western Europe.
Thank you. That's a great question, and I also appreciate the connection between your name and ALP, Anna Olivia Pluribel. Yet another connection here. Maybe I'll start to answer that question by referring to the interviews I did. And there I did ask authors what connections they saw between Irish history and Russian history. And by and large, I don't think any of them really had anything of substance to say there to this question. They did maybe see it as incidental. It just wasn't as significant. And then with the other writer, the 5 case studies that I was looking at, none of them really spoke about Ireland in the way you're describing here, that the Irish context really mattered. I think for them, it was much more about his language, his innovations, his art. And of course, Ireland is everything in his art, but it didn't change or affect directly what they were writing about. On Joyce's end, he occasionally, when writing about Russia, he would suggest that Ireland, like Russia, he would say that both countries are on the periphery, that they were peripheral nations. one in the west and one in the east, and saw a kind of I don't know, connection that way. He could relate to the Russian experience because he came from the backwoods or periphery of Ireland. It's his words, not mine. And my paraphrase as well. And you know, he read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and lots of writers and could relate to some of their works, but on the Russian side, no, unfortunately, or for better or worse, yeah, it seems more incidental than anything else in their interpretations and readings of Joyce. And I guess I should say too that I think a big part of that for a writer like Nabokov or Shishkin and Sokolov too, he's an Irish writer, but he also represents so much more. He's universal. He lived in Paris, he lived in Europe, and became this true cosmopolitan and integrated himself into European literature instead of just being an Irish writer. So maybe that's the way it comes through.
I was struck by the phrases that came up from your quotes, which was the West or Europe. Ireland didn't really seem to appear. And as you say, Ireland is so central to to Joyce. But
yeah,
mutators me that is. Question from Miran now. Jose, apart from Zinovy, whom you mentioned, what other contemporary Russian writers that is, have reacted to Joyce? Thank you for an extremely interesting paper.
Thank you. Thanks again. So I don't want to leave anyone here out. So if you mean which writers did I force into responding to Joyce and interviewed, I can just give you the list and then comment on some other ones. But Andrei Babikov, Ksenia Buksha, Bikov Glazova, Alexander Ilinin, Ilchevsky, Ilya Kukulin, Dmitry Rogozin, Rubinstein did not have much to say about him. Salnikov, Alexander Sidan, Grigory Sluzhitsil, and yeah, those are the ones I interviewed along with the ones mentioned in the talk. Beyond that, other responses to Joyce, is that what you had in mind, Miran?
Is Miran there?
Oh, maybe she had to go. Oh, okay.
Oh, hang on, there's a message in the chat that popped up. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in my conversations with them varied from they had a lot to say about Joyce to others who had less to say about him. Reached out to Sorokin, and he did not have anything to say. He appreciated Joyce in his youth, but didn't, I don't know, develop that interest any further.
Grant. Richard Davies, you've had your hand up a number of times. Do you want to ask a question? Absolutely fine if not.
Yeah, no, certainly. Thanks very much. It was a fascinating talk. I received the notification of it when I just started rereading. No, I'll say reading for the second time Ulysses after over 50 years. Not rereading because I remembered nothing. However, I then read it, I finished it last week, and the whole time, knowing that you were going to give your talk, I was asking myself, how on earth did the Russians understand this? Because I'm a long-standing and very, very stubborn reader, and yet I found chunks completely incomprehensible, just at the level of the language. And as I was finding them incomprehensible, I was thinking, how did anybody translate this? And what did they make of it? And how well, therefore, could non-native speakers of English actually understand what was on the page? And I wondered whether in your work, you've had a sense of the level at which your authors and others actually understood what was on the page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. maybe to and start answering that, I can share my screen again. Had some bonus slides, you can say. This is a partial translation history. I just included kind of highlights or curiosities, not everything. But the first translation was just fragments, as I mentioned, in 1925. So not even complete episodes, just selections from Molly's soliloquy at the end, or the first chapter, things in between. The late 20s and early 30s, some more fragments were published, excuse me, some poems, another section of the novel, Hades. And then between 35 and 36, more than half of the novel was published, or at least more than half of the episodes, and then things clamped down after the translation of Dubliners. And just a few things in the intervening years before things picked up again, late 60s, 70s, and 80s, as I was suggesting. And then the translation of Ulysses, the complete one, was begun by Hinkes in the 70s. He described it as penal servitude at one point in correspondence. It was rough. And he didn't manage to completing it before he died, but he bequeathed this task. You could think of it as a gift or a curse or something to Sergei Haruji, who also recently passed away. But he managed to complete it, and it was published and serialized in the late 80s and then 93. And then just a couple more curiosities. The Cat and the Devil, a story Joyce wrote for his grandson, translated in 91. Finnegans Wake fragments, there were some that occurred before as well, but this is significant because the Volokhovsky, the brother of the sister in the Volokhovsky PVA, Volokhovsky translation team, who's translated Tolstoy, Gogol, Dostoevsky, everyone, the classics mostly. He was a poet himself, and he translated, he considered them musical transcriptions, or transcriptions of a kind of variations on Finnegans Wake. But then just last year, just this past December, the final complete version of a Russian Finnegans Wake was translated. So all of which to say is, yes, it was incredibly difficult. There are these moments both to translate and to read, but maybe no less so, like you said, right? Reading Joyce in the English, it presents its own challenges as well, and road bumps. And it also varied. Nabokov was, he knew English better than I do, English, than any of us knows English probably. And he first encountered it in England when he was studying there, read it, and then came back to it. He offered to translate it to Joyce in the early 30s, but nothing came of that, which is a shame. It's a great what if. And so obviously his understanding of the English Ulysses would have been unlike any of the others I looked at. But Sokolov studied languages. He would have comprehended it quite readily. Anyone who studies English well enough will be eventually be up to the task. Just like we, or I at least, and others in this room read difficult Russian texts. It's possible. And what draws them in, I think, varies, and there's different motivations for that. But these big questions and the universal topics that Joyce addresses in the book, whether it's paternity or legacies or history or relationships, anything, provides some of that motivation.
Can I just add a little bit, because I personally read Joyce in Russian as an undergraduate student, and I read it in Russian, and I was reading it in the translation made by Sergei Haruji, and this is an absolutely amazing text because the commentary to the book is bigger than the book, and I can admit it actually spoils your reading, but you have references almost to every sentence, so you're forced to understand, even if you don't really want to understand. All this additional comments and realities which you are not familiar because you are from a different culture. They're just thrown at you. So at least for contemporary readers of Joyce in Russian, there is this opportunity to learn quite a lot what is hidden behind the text. Yeah, but I can't say anything about Sasha Sokolov and his generation of readers. But yeah, that's how modern readers, I think, grasp something.
Another quick thing I'll mention here for the conclusion, some others I spoke with, including Alexei, who's here with us now. There's a Joyce reading group in Moscow that meets on Zoom before Zoom became a thing. That's where they were meeting. And you all read Ulysses plenty, other works, and have moved on to Finnegans Wake now. And not to put you on the spot, but if you want to comment on this question, you're welcome to, of course. Oh, we can't hear you for some reason.
All right.
Maybe no.
No.
The microphone selected.
It's all looking okay from this end, I think. I fear it's at the other end.
Well,
bad luck. Well, that's a shame. Couple more questions in the chat. Chris Francis would love to hear your thoughts on Joyce and Shishkin, particularly Shishkin's claims that Joyce doesn't love his heroes. Thanks again for the wonderful talk.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I don't see that. There's so much love in Joyce and Ulysses, and even in Finnegans Wake. And I don't know. I don't like to get too sentimental about Joyce and claim, I don't know, that it's all positive and hippy dippy necessarily. But it's clear, to me anyway, that he loves Stephen and Bloom and Molly and these creatures that he's imbued with so much life. Shishkin, right, is the most contemporary of the writers that I had looked at. Still around, still writing to some extent. For me, what was most useful was this essay, which maybe you're familiar with, right? More Than Joyce, Russian Joyce. This essay that I look at as a kind of Rosetta Stone to his relationship with Joyce, which he comments. It's a biography of Joyce in a way, an account of his last days and of what he gained from Joyce. So yeah, I mean, as I alluded to, I think Joyce for him is this representative of the West in a way that he can reconnect with the Western tradition in opposition to other trends in contemporary Russian literature that are more nationalistic and want to turn inward instead of outward. Again, the kind of cosmopolitan ideal that Joyce represents. And there too, I think the stylistic influence, like Sokolov, is important. It's part of this tradition from Nabokov to Sokolov to Shishkin and Joyce as a kind of foreign representative as well, with the stream of consciousness and the many borrowings in Shishkin's work, I think are also derived from the Joycean model, where, especially in Finnegans Wake, but even Ulysses, Joyce took from so many different authors and incorporated quotations and in words, right? Plagiarized, creative, artistic plagiarism into the work. Those are the kind of angles that I took in analyzing the two. Thank you.
Grand. And there's one more question in the chat. I don't know if Alexei's mic is now working, but I'll ask Anushka's question because she's waited a long time. So Anushka asks, says, great talk, thank you. Would love if you could expand a bit more on the connection with Nabokov, who I'm doing my PhD on. I'm particularly interested in whether you explored at all the theme of Jewishness, a motif both authors use as a representation of modernism, wandering, and unbelonging.
Thank you. No, but I think you should do it. I think you should pursue this and let me know what you find. Yeah, in my in the chapter on Nabokov, in my angle, and fitting into the through line of the novel, what I was looking at is the gift, and primarily as a kind of quasi translation of Ulysses. So the gift is Nabokov's final Russian novel. There are a lot of structural and thematic and character similarities in the two works. And again, because Nabokov offered to translate Ulysses not too long before he began work on the gift, I see the gift as a kind of a translation, right? He didn't literally translate Ulysses, but in effect, the gift, dar in Russian, which incorporates the word yes in Russian, da, and was the original title of, or a possible title for dar. That's the way Nabokov could rewrite Joyce and respond to this idea of paternity and these lineages, because as someone who had to emigrate and lost everything, right, he wanted to recover it. So he uses the Shakespeare theory, but to a different end, to bring together fathers and to recover the past instead of separating it like Joyce and Stephen and others do. No, you're absolutely right. I think, I mean, even there, some of these themes could be explored, the ones you mentioned. And in his lectures, I would need to reread them, but his lectures on literature and on Ulysses, there might be some threads to pull out there. But thank you.
Grand, thank you, everybody. We have a few minutes left, so if anyone else has a question, please pop it in the chat, or Jose, if you want to respond to Chris again, please do. Whatever you like, whatever you like.
Right, yeah. Bloom as the one who drew. Alexei, did you get, was the microphone working?
No.
So you'll have to read the book to know more about the reading group.
It was all a ploy. It was all a ploy.
Speaking of which, I think that my publisher would be upset if I didn't mention it, that I have a coupon code. Is it okay if I mention this?
Of course, of course.
You know, they push you to mention it. So there's some coupon codes if you're interested in reading, or if your library might be interested in ordering a copy, you can share.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Cornell, of course. Great. Well, if there are no further questions, that's fine. We've had a lot of very, very good discussion, I think, and a great talk. And so well, before I say goodbye, actually, I have some news. We'll have news of more Anglo-Russian talks for this year coming soon. And we also are planning a conference for June this year, the summer this year, to be held at Exeter, but we are very, very much hopeful we'll have an online component so people can attend from around the world and speak from around the world, because one silver lining of the pandemic has been the fact that we have actually broadened our horizons as our worlds have got smaller. So that there'll be more news on that, call for paper, details, etc. to follow. And with that, thank you very much, Jose. That was a wonderful talk. Thank you to all the people who asked questions and everyone else who came. And we will see you soon.
Thank you again for the invitation and for attending.
Cheers all. And the recording will be online soon, so you can watch it on YouTube.